بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا ونبينا محمد ذي القدر العظيم وعلى آله وأصحابه والتابعين لهم بإحسان وهدى إلى يوم الدين. اللهم فقهنا في الدين وعلمنا التأويل وألهمنا رشدنا يا رب العالمين. Alhamdulillah, we're continuing our look at the foundations of religion and guidance, and we reached lesson number 8, which we're going to look at some of the key principles underlying Islamic theology. So we looked in the previous lesson at some of the underlying meanings of belief affirmed in revelation, on what revelation tells us about who is God, the attributes of God, and the transcendence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So in lesson 7, we looked at some of the key principles and texts on what are the roots of underlying Islamic theology. A clear understanding of divinity, that who is Allah, and a clear affirmation of the attributes of the divine, and an unequivocal emphasis on the transcendence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, today we're going to look at some of the key principles related to the science of Islamic beliefs as relates to us as believers. The first thing to look at is what are the pathways to Islamic belief, and the pathways to believe. And broadly, there's 3 aspects to this. Right? There is revelation, there is reason, and there is realization, spiritual realization. So these are 3 pathways of belief. Revelation, in that if we accept the Quran to be the book of Allah, and we have certitude that this is in fact revelation and it's preserved, then it would entail that one affirms what is decisively affirmed in the Quran as decisive points of belief. Right? So this is the first pathway of belief, which is why at the foundation of our religion is understanding of what is revelation and how that revelation is preserved. And that is if that is taken out from our religion, then there's not much left to say. So clarity on that is key, which is why we looked at that, and the base, both to understand revelation and secondly to be clear as to how we affirm that the Quran is clearly inimitable and it is clearly preserved as revealed. So that's one of the pathways of belief. What is affirmed in what is clearly and decisively affirmed in revelation, it must be accepted. Secondly is reason. Right? Reason one of the ways that reason is a pathway of belief is that unless you can think, without thinking there is no understanding, and without understanding you will not you won't understand what revelation is affirming, right? And revelation itself calls us to think, reflect, contemplate, understand, consider. Right? And experience shows us that reason is a sound source of judgment. Right? That reason is a sound source of judgment. And if revelation is true, it would not contradict reason. But if reason is sound, it would not contradict revelation. The role of reason, right, within the ambit of knowledge in general, of affirming matters of knowledge, but particularly when it comes to affirming religious truths, matters of faith, there were some of what we can call the literalist excess who generally did not look to reason as, they looked to reason with great distrust. Right? If the text says it, we accept it, we won't try to understand it, etc. Relate it as it has come and don't delve into it. And there's a piety underlying that. Right? Say what the Quran and Sunnah say, and that's it. And if it is limited to that, it's justifiable. Right? That if the Quran has come with clear guidance, then then just say what the Quran says, and that's it. But as Muslim societies engaged with the intellectual challenges that naturally arise in any civilization, and they interacted with other civilizations, and people considered our religious tradition, there were people who started saying all kinds of things. So how do you then understand revelation? How do you defend what you consider to be sound? How do you explain it to the confused? Right? So at one side, there was the literalist excess. On the other side, some wary of in part of the simplicity of a literalist presentation, that, well, this is what it says and that's it. What does it mean? We're not going to talk about it. And at the same time, responding to many of the intellectual challenges emerging from within and from without, there was also a rationalist excess, historically, particularly from the 2nd century onwards. So the way of the mainstream was that, yes, reason has a critical role in sound understanding of matters of belief, of what we believe about Allah, and how we understand what is clearly affirmed in revelation. But its role is firstly to clarify. Right? Firstly, to clarify what revelation affirms. Secondly, to provide proof for what is affirmed in revelation, so that if addressing those who are thinking and making intellectual arguments on matters related to belief, matters related to what is reality, etc., you can present the truths of revelation in a manner that they would be willing to accept them. Because if someone is either misinterpreting revelation, then you can't just say, well, this is what it says, because they are interpreting it differently. And just repeating what it says 10 times will not convince them if they're interpreting it differently. So you have to have principles by which you can make your case. Similarly, if someone does not accept revelation alone as a as sufficient proof, you can't keep repeating to them, well, the Quran says that God is one. The Quran says that this world is originated. Okay. Prove it to me. If they don't take that as sufficient proof that, well, the Quran says it, so either if they're interpreting it not to be saying that, or they don't accept it as a source, you have to be able to reason with them, which the Quran encourages. It's the role of reason, first, to clarify what has come in revelation. Secondly, as proof. Thirdly, to defend sound understanding. Right? And fourth, to refute unsound understanding. And many sects emerged in, particularly from the 2nd century onwards, 2nd century after the Hijrah, and there was a strong reason to refute, one, the sects with it that branched off from mainstream Islam, and secondly, Muslims were actively in contact with, particularly with Christians, with other Eastern traditions and so on, and there was, and also many of those deeply influenced by the Greek philosophers, etc. So there was, so reason is one of the main pathways of belief in accordance with the truths of revelation. There's a third pathway, which is realization, that it is clear in the Quran, it is clear in the teachings of the Prophet ﷺ, right, that there is a distinction between mere faith and faith realized. Right? And faith realized, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala refers to levels of certitude in a number of places in the Quran. Right? From having, from knowing with certitude to realizing certitude, to being fully realized in certitude. Right? So there's degrees of certitude. Right? So how is that nurtured? Right? How is that nurtured? This is one of the nurturing of belief is a pathway to belief. Because if you have mere belief, you are more susceptible to that belief being shaken than someone who has belief with a higher degree of certitude. Right? So while the realization of faith directly is a role of the science of Islamic spirituality, however, the scholars would remind of the connection between the science of knowing, okay, this is what we believe, which is affirmed by revelation. Right? That from revelation we understand these points to be things that we must believe in. The role of reason is to explain that and to provide intellectual arguments to defend that. Right? And some of that protects sound belief. Others are for those delving deeply or who have confusions or who want to be able to defend and refute sound beliefs. But all of this has a purpose, because to know what is true about Allah and the messengers and other points of faith, ultimately its purpose is not just to affirm it, but for these points of belief to be experienced, lived, and realized. So you don't just say that Allah has power over all things, but you experience that, you live it, so that if things happen, you have consciousness of those points of belief. So it's not just a checkbox. Yes, I believe that everything is in the hands of God. But you realize that, right, actively. There's degrees of that realization. So these are broadly the three pathways of belief. And the importance of this third aspect in supporting and fulfilling the purpose of beliefs is explained and defended very beautifully by one of the great giants of Islamic scholarship, Imam Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, in his autobiography. It's called in Arabic Al-Munqidh min al-Dalal, deliverance from error, where he goes through his own intellectual journey and struggles, and the key role of spiritual realization in complete realized acceptance of revelation and the truths that reason points to. There are a number of supporting sciences that the science of Islamic beliefs requires certain other sciences to support, to provide strong scaffolding or support for it. And a believer who cares about the health and well-being of their religion would benefit from these. One of them is language. It's the Arabic language. Why? Because while anyone who is presented the truths of that the Quran has come with, anyone who's presented the call to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the message of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, has the capacity of believing. And they may go far in living and realizing that belief. However, to truly have personal appreciation and understanding and conviction of the truth of the Quran, one needs to have depth of understanding of the language of the Quran, because the underlying argument for the truth of this revelation is the inimitability of the Quran, which is only really possible to personally appreciate by having a deep appreciation, a deep, sound appreciation for the subtleties and nuances of the Arabic language. Which is why Imam Jalaluddin al-Suyuti, who compiled a 1,000-line poem in the science of eloquence or rhetoric, balagha, in his commentary in the opening, he discusses what's the virtue of the science of balagha, of the science of eloquence or rhetoric. And he says that it is not far-fetched to affirm that appreciation of balagha, or the science of eloquence, is a condition for the perfection of faith. Because the perfection of faith is dependent on deeply immersing oneself in the meanings and realities of the Quran. And that's not possible that's not possible for oneself. Others can tell you about it, that well, Imam al-Baghawi said this and so and so said this, but you're just saying, okay, yeah, they're saying it's true. And for many people, that's enough, right? Many people are willing to be bystanders. Or most people, thankfully, are just willing to be bystanders. Okay? But some are not satisfied. It's like, some, they say, hearing is not like beholding. Hearing is not like beholding. So that is part of true appreciation of the inimitability of the Quran, true appreciation and realization of its meaning. This is one of the great supports. And also it defends sound understanding. That no, that's not what the Arabs say. The literalist excess goes against basic principles of sound Arabic. That the Arabs, the language by which the Quran was revealed, the Arabs had metaphorical usages. Not everything was understood literally. Okay? Another of the supporting sciences, particularly when it comes to reason, was that if people are making rational arguments, one needs to be able to have sound understanding and sound arguments. So that's why the sciences of mantiq, of logic, and the science of how do you debate soundly and how do you debate effectively and also how you debate fairly, these two sciences are important tools. Logic, mantiq, for sound understanding and sound definitions, and the science of adab al-bahthi wal-munadhara, the science of debate, of research and debate. What are the principles? Sound debate, the principles of effective debate, and also the principles of fair debate. So you don't make false arguments, and you're able to reject others' false arguments. So this is a supporting science. Islamic law also relates to beliefs. How? How would the science of Islamic law relate to beliefs? To know the ruling of belief, but that's simple. You don't need the science of Islamic law. It's obligatory to believe. Like, okay, next. As bearing upon ethics, the theologians are not concerned about ethics. Right? Like, you said Islamic law. Yeah, but how does law support Islamic beliefs? No, but that's a theological concern. There
are matters that we know from the law that are only by revelation. So
law is only by revelation. That analogy is a derivative tool, right? Analogy only brings out meanings that are affirmed by revelation. Right? No, I'm talking about the other way around.
Answer online. Faith increases with righteous actions. Law teaches.
No, we're not talking about actions. We're talking about law itself. There's a number of things that Islamic law guides the science of beliefs, right? One is that it is the jurists above, and there's an overlap between usul al-din, right, the principles of religion, which is the science of Islamic beliefs, and usul al-fiqh, the foundational principles of Islamic law. Right? Amongst them is defining who is the morally responsible person. Right? Who is morally responsible? And questions related to al-mukallaf. Right? Who is morally responsible? Because belief is an action. Right? Belief is an action. What you believe and why you believe, etc., is a theological, is a concern of the theologians. But belief as an action, all human actions are governed by rulings of the Sharia. Okay? Belief is an action of the heart. The heart is one of the limbs that are addressed by the divine command. So the law affects that, because who is the morally responsible person? The one addressed by the divine command. Because belief is only obligatory because Allah has made belief obligatory. Right? So the investigations related to moral responsibility of who is the hakim, who is the one who has commanded, and what the command is, the one commanded, the morally responsible, and the nature of the command, that touches upon belief. And then moral responsibility, the jurists will tell us in terms of what is the moral responsibility of an adult. When is someone morally responsible? When they're an adult and the conditions of that. What about a child? Is a non-Muslim, what is the moral responsibility of a non-Muslim? What is the moral responsibility of someone whom the message has not reached? These are all legal implications of the human act of belief. Similarly, there's things that affect moral responsibility, such as loss of sanity, such as disability, such as intoxication, such as errors in speech. What happens if someone is saying to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is addressing Allah and they say, "Oh Allah, you're my servant and I'm your Lord." Are they a kafir? Well, not necessarily. The fuqaha would say not necessarily, because it could be a slip of the tongue. And the proof of that is the hadith, one of the fundamental hadiths of repentance, where the man who lost his mount in the desert and lost all hope, just leaned back against the tree, giving up any hope of belief, of finding his mount which had all his provision in the desert and there's no food or water anywhere. Then the animal came back, and in the ecstasy of encounter, this man says, "Oh Allah, you're my servant and I'm your Lord." He actually wanted to say the opposite. The Prophet ﷺ smiled and said, "أخطأ من شدة الفرح." He erred from the intensity of his rejoicing. But there is a legal consequence to that, right? That what if one made an error in speech? I say, well, there's errors that are excused. However, if afterwards, if people complain, this guy is saying weird things publicly, right, the judge would question the person that, are you promoting these noise? And no, Your Honor, I didn't mean it. So, okay, don't say it again. Okay. Right? So, Islamic law, there touches upon beliefs. One, in terms of who is the morally responsible person, the questions of moral responsibility, and also legal implications of beliefs. Who must pray, etc. Beliefs affects law as well. Right? There are legal consequences to belief. Someone became Muslim and then they died right away. What do we do with them? Do we bury them with the Muslims or not? What actions constitute belief? At least in a worldly sense. So in traditional societies where people's belief defined their identity. If someone asks you, who are you? No one would say, well, I'm Canadian. They say, well, I'm a Muslim, I'm a Christian, I'm this. And it's inconceivable that you could step away from that faith community just like that. It's a considered serious thing. Even now, in many parts of the world, if someone changes faith, their own family will kill them. Because it's so, and which we don't say that's correct, but because that's who you are. And that's who we are. It's a fundamental threat to everything. So if someone prayed in congregation with the Muslims, in the masjid, from the beginning, some of the jurists said that we would deem them to be Muslim. Now that's not the case now. People come, the school groups come and everyone joins in the prayer, and next day they go to the Buddhist temple and they join in the meditation there. And they'll go to the Hindu temple and and engage in puja. And it's all good. Well, one, it's not all good, but it doesn't mean that today they're Muslim and tomorrow they're Buddhist. It just meant they just joined in. It does not indicate. So the jurists discuss what actions constitute beliefs. There's a number of aspects of law that are related to belief. Also, what is kufr? Because it just says iman, faith is an action, disbelief is also an action. And ultimately, both faith, though both belief and disbelief are actions of the heart, but they have worldly implications. And how do you handle those worldly implications? The jurists, the fuqaha, deal with that. There's also certain points of law that are established so decisively that they become considered matters of belief, particularly when some people had erroneous beliefs about them, things that are decisively established. So they're actually actions, but they're decisively established, and someone came and challenged whether this is actually permissible or not. So for example, is there anything wrong with never brushing your teeth in your life? Is there anything wrong with that? It's foolish. You may end up without your teeth or whatever, but it's not religious. It's not a moral obligation to brush your teeth. Okay? In itself, like if you're like there's secondary, but it's not obligatory to brush your teeth. Let alone use a toothstick itself, this siwak. But it's a matter so clearly established as being permitted, recommended in the Sunnah, that denying it is problematic. Or more fundamentally, for example, wiping over khufs. It's actually better not to wipe over your footgear. But so clearly established that denying it is problematic. Right? So some legal matters have theological implications because you're denying a decisive text of revelation. Some matters people would get confused on. So the scholars of Islamic beliefs will talk about it even though it's got nothing to do with belief directly. For example, that Allah answers dua, because there's some discussion about it. So that's why in Jawharat al-Tawheed it says وَعِنْدَنَا أَنَّ الدُّعَاءَ يُقْبَلُ or إِنَّ الدُّعَاءَ يَنْفَعُ, that it is the position of the Islamic mainstream that dua benefits, that Allah accepts dua, because there's the theologians disagree. Okay, how do you understand supplication vis-a-vis destiny? So they'll mention some things that are actually related to Islamic law in theology as well. Other supporting subjects, people, science, or we can call it, the natural sciences, are appealing. This world is a pretty interesting place. Some people would be very impressed by sophisticated descriptions of science. And it's always been a convenient cubbyhole for those who don't want to believe in higher truths. Right? Say, well, science. Right? And prove it. So you say, well, this world is created. So someone says, well, prove this world is created. So science is an important tool to be able to affirm basic realities related to belief. That we believe in God. Why? Because this world is created, creation requires a creator, and that creator is God. So prove to me, my friend, that this world is created. So you have to get into, someone make scientific argument, you have to be able to work through those arguments, which is why many of the classical works of theology spend a third of the work describing the world. And actually, when describing what is the subject matter of the science of Islamic beliefs, some of the theologians said, al-alam, that the subject of the science of Islamic beliefs is the world. Why would it be the world? من حيث دلالته على الخالق. Insofar as it's the world that, the creation that points to the creator. The scholars of spirituality take offense to that. They say that that's shameful, right? That you have to prove the one you love, right? But, so to describe, to be clear, to establish the point that this world and all it contains is originated, and that which is originated requires an originator, one may need to delve into science. But that delving into science is not because science is itself an absolute source of knowledge, but simply to clarify the underlying point that this is originated, this is created, the originated requires an originator, the created requires a creator. Another support, and although the scholars are very wary of it, because much that is said in it is confused and confusing, and ultimately unsatisfying, as noble as the initial premise may be, is philosophy. Is philosophy. But when there are people who are talking in philosophy, who are making philosophical arguments, using philosophical terminology, and thereby either themselves stuck in discourse that keeps them away from the call to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or whose discourse confuses those whom one is trying to call to Allah, then one needs to provide clarity, either to those whose own outlook is a philosophical outlook, or those who are affected by that. That, well, according to Muninistein, this is, so then you have to be able to talk, because as Sayyidina Ali has related that, address people in accordance with their understanding. Because if you don't, then people will deny Allah and His Messenger. Right? So this is an area. However, they say the philosophers are rather like the poets. Right? That, well, the poets are colorful, and most of them don't mean what they say. The philosophers are intellectually colorful, and ultimately they're not actually saying that much. But this is an area that the ulama were forced to delve into for the purpose of providing clarity and guidance. So these are some of the supports for the science of theology. Ultimately, where is it affirmed from? It is the call of revelation. Right? The call of revelation. Confirmed by the mind, realized by the soul. But these are some of the supports for it. We looked at length in the previous lesson at some of the principles of revelation related to Islamic beliefs. Right? But to recap, in summary, revelation tells us above all, right, the central subject of revelation is Allah. Right? What is the message of the Quran? The message of the Quran tells us who is your Lord. Right? Who is Allah? And it's clear from the Quran that who is God? God is necessary. The definition of God as the one absolutely free of need of any other, whom all are in absolute need of. Ya ayyuhan nas antumul fuqara'u ila Allah. O people, you're the ones in absolute need of Allah. Wallahu huwa al-ghaniyyul hamid. And Allah, He is the one alone, absolutely free of any need, worthy of all praise. Right? And we looked at some of the other texts related to this. Allahu khaliqu kulli shay', al-hayyul qayyum. Right? Allah is the creator of all things. He is the living, the sustaining. Right? So the Revelation tells us about who is God, and this is really important. And a believer should be able to talk comfortably about God. And it's one of the greatest travesties in people talking about Islam. Right? Islam, while it may be true that it is a way of life, but why live that way? Why live that way? Saying, well, that's who I am, is not a rational argument. The underlying question is, why are you the way you are? Right? So, well, because I am. That's a circular argument. Right? So, the point of all of religion is Allah. Like the only reason, there's no point in talking about, okay, why does a Muslim woman wear hijab? Why do we pray? Why do we do this? The point of all of it is Allah. So who is Allah? We're not interested in calling people to hijab, to halal meat, to the avoidance of riba. We're not interested in calling people to pray. Right? The point of all of it is Allah. قُلْ هَذِهِ سَبِيلِي أَدْعُو إِلَى اللَّهِ. Say, this is my path, I call to Allah. عَلَى بَصِيرَةٍ, with insight. أَنَا وَمَنِ اتَّبَعَنِي, I and those who follow me. So it's very important for one to be clear oneself, who is your Lord? So you are living your religion purposefully. Otherwise, honestly, it makes no sense whatsoever. Right? It's just a demonstration of the merciful power of human heedlessness that so many people go through the motions unthinkingly. It's amazing. Right? There's people who get up every night, and there are underlying, the theologians would be amazed by it. But you tell them that, well, there's the heart, and the heart, and say, whatever. Right? Why are you getting up in the middle of the night? Because it's good to do so. Who said it's good to do so? Allah. Where? In the Quran. How do you know the Quran is from Allah? Because it says it is. How do you know that's true? The theologians wonder, the theologians approach the world as if pretty much everyone is mad. Right? Because few people think. But Allah has told us that. بَلْ أَكْثَرُهُمْ لَا يَعْقِلُونَ. But most of them don't really think. Which is mercy. But to the extent that you have clarity on these truths, would you have greater conviction and greater resolve to seek the one you are worshipping and submitting to, etc. So this is the first aspect. Who is Allah? Revelation also tells us about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's attributes. And we talked at length how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes Himself and the self-disclosure of Allah in the Quran being so amazing. The names of Allah. Every page of the Quran, Allah is telling us about who He is by His names. Because each of the names affirms meanings of the one named. Okay? Who is the merciful? It is Allah. But it affirms the meaning of mercy for Him. Who is the gentle? The gentle is Allah. But it affirms a meaning. Who is the overpowering? It is Allah. But it affirms a meaning for Him. Right? So Revelation tells us about the names of Allah, which point to His attributes. And it's clear in the Quran that that Allah possesses the most beautiful names. He possesses all attributes of perfection. And we saw in the previous lesson the clear and unequivocal affirmation of divine transcendence in the Quran. لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ. There's absolutely nothing like unto him. And that's from the affirmation of absoluteness and perfection for the divine, that he is transcendent beyond all meanings, unbecoming the divine. وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ كُفُوًا أَحَدٍ. And there's none like unto him, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the closing of Surah Al-Ikhlas. The Quran also tells us about Allah through His actions. Directly, where Allah tells us about the nature of the divine act, فَعَالٌ لِمَا يُرِيدُ, the one who does absolutely whatsoever He wills. إِنَّمَا أَمْرُهُ إِذَا أَرَادَ شَيْئًا أَن يَقُولَ لَهُ كُن فَيَكُونُ. His command, if He wills something, is simply be, and it is. But also, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us by indication of His actions through describing the createdness of the heavens and the earth, by telling us about what happened to the past people, by telling us about what will happen on the day of resurrection in the future. It is all the divine act. So, the Quran is describing the actions of Allah, the one creator. كُلَّ يَوْمٍ هُوَ فِي شَأْنٍ. Every day, He is engaged. So He's the one creator. The Quran affirms the reality of the eternal divine decree, qada, and the divine act of creating, that is destiny unfolding. It tells us about the meanings the servant must have with respect to the divine act, which is that the servant must have reliance and trust upon their Lord, and the other human traits arising out of recognition of the reality that Allah is the creator of all things. The Quran also talks about human actions, that the affirmation that Allah is the sole ultimate actor, that Allah is the creator of everything, that does not negate the affirmation of human action. But that human action is through acquired responsibility, that we affirm both, that Allah is the creator of everything. That is the divine act. You just to originate out of nothing. But we also affirm the human act, but it is not, we do not create, meaning we do not originate out of nothing. Rather, our human action, which is our directing, our contingent will and power, which if directed towards the good, we acquire praise and maybe entitled to, maybe subject to reward, or we direct it towards the wrong and we acquire blame and may be subject to accountability. لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها. Allah does not make a soul responsible for more than it is able. So it is. So the human has ability. لها ما كسبت. It has for it what it acquires of good. وعليها ما اكتسبت. And against it is what it incurs of blame. Right? So affirmation of the reality of the divine act does not negate human ability and contingent human action from which it is responsible. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also tells us about the prophets who were sent throughout the ages, some of whom we know about, and others whose names and lives are lost in the mists of history. Right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us about the prophets, their role as recipients of revelation and as callers to Allah and the way of turning in life to Allah. We Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us both explicitly and by indication through telling us their life stories about the qualities of the prophets. That they're all true. That they're all trustworthy. They all conveyed what they're commanded to convey, and that they're all exemplary and brilliant. And it describes their lives and their call and the tests and tribulations because they serve as exemplars. That if you believe, strive to believe as the best of creation believed, right? Who throughout history were the prophets, and with the coming of the final prophet, as Imam Laqani says, وَكُنْ كَمَا كَانَ خِيَارُ الْخَلْقِ حَلِيفَ حِلْمٍ تَابِعًا لِلْحَقِّ. Be as the best of creation ever was, always upholding forbearance and always following truth. Right? So Revelation tells us about the prophets, and that's a fundamental investigation in the science of Islamic beliefs, because there are the ambassadors of God to His creation. And then the Quran tells us about haqa'iq, about truths, right? And these are what are called the sam'iyat, the transmitted beliefs. It tells us what will happen after this life, that after death there's a life of the grave, there is resurrection and the afterlife. That these were not necessary, but there's a great divine wisdom that Allah chose for there to be a resurrection and an afterlife. And He tells us, they questioned. The Arabs had no clue what would happen after this life. And they questioned. One of the disbelievers actually, when he heard this Prophet Muhammad in Mecca says that there's a resurrection, he took a dry, brittle bone and he crushed it in front of the face of the Prophet ﷺ. He said, مَنْ يُحْيِي الْعِظَامَ وَهِيَ رَمِيمٌ. Who will revive dry bones when they have dried and become brittle? And the divine response came. قُلْ يُحْيِيهَا الَّذِي أَنْشَأَهَا أَوَّلَ مَرَّةٍ. Said they'll be revived by the one who originated them in the first. Okay? Allah created them out of nothing. And so if He wishes, He can create them again. Right? And other truths regarding the unseen, al-ghayb. Right? And these are tests of our acceptance of the reality of revelation, which is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the opening of the Quran, in Surah Al-Baqarah, says, who benefits from this guidance? Alif Lam Mim, ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابُ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ. Alif Lam Mim, that is the book in which there is no doubt. هُدًى لِلْمُتَّقِينَ, a guidance for the mindful. الَّذِينَ يُؤْمِنُونَ بِالْغَيْبِ, those who believe in the unseen. And in general terms, belief in God Himself is from belief in the unseen. And similarly, the other truths that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala affirms, such as belief in the angels, such as the affirmation that they are jinn. We have no proof that there's jinn. Right? So Brother Saad comes and said, I had a conversation with a jinn. I say, the doctor so-and-so, maybe you should go. And the Arabs were confused about different things. They believed that there were these creatures in the desert called ghul. Interestingly, Revelation does not affirm or deny it. There's no revealed proof for or against the existence of ghul. It's irrelevant. But Allah chose to tell us about jinn, because He tells us that they're also morally responsible creatures. About angels. But He also tells us, وَيَخْلُقُ مَا لَا تَعْلَمُونَ, and He creates things that you have no knowledge of. So these are some of the realities affirmed in revelation. But then as we saw, reason is critical. One, to soundly understand what revelation is telling us, but also to be able to defend that. Right? To be able to defend that. Not everyone needs to engage in a rational understanding of beliefs. The common Muslim, what they're responsible for is, okay, well, this is what revelation tells us, I accept. That's it. Allah ma'ak. May Allah be with you. That's it. But having some degree of understanding of what you believe can help strengthen one's conviction. Having further clarity supports that conviction, particularly if that clarity serves to inoculate one from likely or possible confusions that one may hear about. And so in our times, for a young Muslim not to know why they believe in God, what are basic arguments for belief in God, makes them susceptible, makes their faith fragile. As much as you nurture it, there will be an inherent fragility that if knocked from the direction of why do you believe in God, the whole thing may shatter. Regardless of how much devotion and worship you've engaged in. Right? And it's not wise to create a structure that is fragile. Right? Even though we're in an age of fragility in human endeavors. But this clarification to inoculate beliefs, to give principles of understanding without going into technicalities, that would ward off the confusions of any age. And some people would benefit from deeper rational investigation of the sciences of Islamic belief to be able to defend sound beliefs. So this is where reason has served an important function. But the defense of sound beliefs is a collective obligation, not a personal obligation. Someone had a question?
Should we be testing that therapy for people we may be responsible for?
Should we be testing that clarity? No. Right? I mean, you don't, like, if you have a strong immune system, you don't do crazy things like run around in your undergarments in your backyard to see whether, you have a strong immune system, or do some wacky things. You just make sure that you're healthy, right? You don't like cut yourself and see if you heal well, and we don't butcher ourselves to see if we'll heal properly. You just, you take care of your health, right? In a totally different context, the Prophet said, don't long for the meeting of the enemy, but ask Allah for well-being, right? So you don't go, you don't say, okay, can I have an appointment with Richard Dawkins? So, Mr. Dawkins, what arguments do you have against God? He'll probably bulldoze you. Doesn't mean he's right. It just means he knows how to bulldoze you, right? Not you, but somebody. So you don't, some people, it's foolish, right? I mean, to test whether the neighborhood you live in is safe, you wouldn't go out at night with a sign saying, I'm walking with $10,000 to see if you get mugged or not. Right? You take precautions. Right? So similarly, you don't allow your faith to be mugged just for the sake of trying it out, but at the same, because the most precious thing you have is your faith. But at the same time, it's not a question of being defensive. that if someone has equipped themselves with sound understanding, etc., then they may be in a position where they can defend sound beliefs, they can call, whether it be atheists or others, but they say, don't go into battle unarmed. It's foolish. So some people jump into debating with atheists on online forums, etc., but they have no training, and that's foolish. Like, learn first, understand, strengthen your own understanding before you engage in those kinds of matters.
From the psychological point of view, reasoning, it's sometimes it's subjective to the emotions. For example, if you live in a group of people, let's say, for example, atheists, your reasoning is going to be based on that group pressure, as well as, of course, being a Muslim or a Christian or anything. So now, from the Islamic point of view, how we can define reason without taking those emotions of the group thinking or the threatening that's in the Quran if you don't believe in God.
Yeah, so your reason will necessarily be, any reasoning will be couched in the in the cultural and social, even political, lived experience of some people, right? Now, part of our responsibility is, and that's part of the intellectual tradition of Islam, is to define what are first principles, right? What are first principles, in a manner that would give one the basic intellectual vocabulary, right? An underlying intellectual vocabulary that can then be applied in different contexts. And if one is sufficiently equipped in it, then one can confidently engage people who are speaking with different understanding. And some of their understandings may be sound, right? And much of them are. Usually it's only certain points where errors arise from, right? And some understandings may not have ultimate significance, right? What someone defines as being respectful or disrespectful, right? That's a matter of subjective judgment. But does this table exist or not? There may be something. What do you mean by existence? Right? What exactly do you mean, etc.? Well, we can clarify. Strip things down to their fundamental meanings. Right? Then what do you mean by existence? Because much of argument happens on words. But then they may be defining it differently. How do you reach a point where you're able to communicate with them, to understand what is تعالوا إلى كلمة سواء بيننا وبينكم. Let's come to a common word between us and you, right? To say, okay, yes, we both agree on these fundamental points, and this is where we differ, right? It's not usually, if you're talking to someone who's Hindu, you can't just tell them that your belief in God, in multiple gods, is wrong. So why? Because the Quran says it's wrong. Okay? Or you can't merely attack them. Most people get defensive. But to be able to identify what is that common word? And what is the common shared meanings? Right? And we know from the Quran that ultimately anyone with polytheistic beliefs ultimately does believe in an ultimate reality, in a supreme being. That people only worship the secondary gods as a means of drawing closer to the ultimate God. And that's wrong, but the way to present belief, for example, to a Hindu person is to identify what is the common word between us, which is that, if you ask an educated Hindu, do you believe in a supreme being? You have to get to that common word. You can't just throw it. And they'll tell you yes. Right? Someone who actually understands the Hindu tradition, they believe in a supreme being. Now, we don't have to get in. You stay away from their specific language, but if you strip it down to the underlying meaning, as Muslims, we believe in that supreme being alone. And the Quran tells us about that supreme being. Now, that's the basis of beginning a conversation. So, now, practically, a lot of the scholars who are not theologians say, look, most people don't think that much. So don't get so caught up in all this rationalist stuff, because most people don't think. But the theologians and philosophers will say, well, some people do. And for those who think, you have to present things in a manner that they think. But also those who don't think are influenced by those who do. Right? Consciously or unconsciously. So you have to be able to, address them too with the thinking that is affecting them, even if they themselves may be unthinking. So we looked as well that one of the important principles of the mainstream is that it strikes a balance between two excesses, the literalist excess and the rationalist excess, right? Because the literalist excess over-affirms. It takes what is affirmed in the Quran, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with saying, well, I believe in these things affirmed in the Quran. But literalism that is not grounded in clear principles, clear rational principles governing sound understanding, has the tendency to go into excessive affirmation. So not only do you affirm that, yes, Allah says, Ar-Rahmanu al-Arsh istawa, the All-Merciful is established on the throne. They say Allah affirms it, and it's literal, folks. Say, okay, calm down. Why is it literal? Because Allah said it. He didn't say it's literal. So then how could it not be literal? That's not an argument. Right? So that's the error of the literalists. That finding yourself at a text that is not clear and not having principles of how you understand it, the most obvious thing to do is to insist on the meaning. Whereas the Sunni mainstream said that no, we affirm what is affirmed in Revelation, but without excess. And we don't over-affirm. And we affirm divine transcendence, so we negate what is negated by revelation, which is any similitude, and that reason would affirm unequivocally. But we don't over-negate. Right? Like we're not prejudiced to negate just because we don't understand it. Right? But we affirm what is affirmed without over-affirmation, and we negate what is negated. But we also don't negate what is affirmed, nor affirm what is negated. And in the formal study of the science of Islamic beliefs, these can be seen. Those of you who have the creed of Imam al-Tahawi, in his creed, ably translated by Shaykh Hamza, may Allah protect him, towards the end talks about the characteristics of the mainstream as the Sirat al-Mustaqim, the straight path, is the path of balance between all excesses. Right? And reason, of course, also serves the purpose of theological defense, right? Which is not for everybody. It's not for everybody. One is to refute sects. Most of these have died off, but the refutation of sects also by refuting what is wrong, one appreciates what are the underlying principles of the mainstream. However, this is not for everybody. And as much as it may be academically satisfying to some, right, it is not required. And we have to be careful because, these days there's an otherwise pretty, being a nice guy is not an intellectual argument. Although it's very intellectually, people find it humanly very appealing. Really nice person. Doesn't mean they're right. It just means they're a nice person. Right? But that's part of the remarkable irrationality of human beings. Right? They must be right. Why? Because they're really nice. It just means they're really nice. Right? That never study Islamic beliefs without a study of the sects of Islam. Why? Did the Prophet ﷺ do it? No. Why does a medical doctor know about sects that existed 1,000 years ago? Like, are you going to be running into Karramiya or Jahmiya or no? Right? That the purpose of the study of sects in the past is intellectual training to understand and be able to apply the tools and the principles related to Islamic beliefs so that you have the capacity to refute other errors in your time. But that's not the duty of everyone. The second is to prove God. Right? That there are people who don't believe or those who have doubts. So you're able to provide clear, coherent proofs for the oneness of God and that Allah is the one God. Right? And this is important, at least at a general level, so that people, so that they don't have fragile faith. And here, inshallah, we'll share, we had a seminar on who is God, and we went to some of the pathways of affirming the belief in God. And inshallah, we'll share a link to that. It's on our YouTube channel. Also, theology its defense serves the purpose of preserving and inoculating sound beliefs. So that people, the way they learn their beliefs, and this is very important in teaching beliefs to our own children, in how Islamic beliefs is taught in Islamic schools and Sunday programs, and even actually in madrasas, in religious seminaries, that the common person, even the common, I wouldn't say scholar, common representative of religion, right? The imam, the chaplain, they don't need to necessarily, if they did, it wouldn't hurt them, but know the science of Islamic beliefs in depth, but they need to have clarity. Why do we believe? That's the basic question. And we need to convey our beliefs within our families, etc., in a manner that would give people clarity. This is why you believe. Okay? Without necessarily engaging in extensive argumentation, etc., but to have that underlying clarity and to dispel common confusions. And this is a challenge, right? Because a lot of what we have of statements of belief, etc., don't address that basic question. So many people are left with lingering doubts. Some of them are aware of their lingering doubts or confusion, and others, it is below the surface, but it is eating away at the framework of their deen. So when the slightest wind of test or tribulation blows, what looked like a big edifice of religious commitment and practice just collapses because of this fragility. The third and final pathway that we talked about of faith, of belief, is realization. That faith has a purpose. Right? Faith has an end. Right? What is the end of faith? the end of faith, the end meaning the aim of faith, is not mere affirmation. Right? Mere affirmation simply makes you a believer. But the point of belief is not mere affirmation that yes, I accept that there is one God. But for that to become a realization. Right? Because it's a point of knowledge. Right? But it's not like any other point of knowledge. This point of knowledge is the fundamental. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, it's al-haqqul mubin. It is the manifest reality. All other points of knowledge, all other realities are only affirmed as derivative affirmations from the fundamental affirmation, which is the truth of God. Okay? Without the reality that God is one and God is the creator and sustainer of all things, nothing else has any reality whatsoever. So reason would entail that someone of any substance should be more conscious of God than they should be conscious of themselves. Because God is more real than you are. Because what is your reality? Your reality is actually a derivative reality. Why do you exist? Because God created you. Why do you exist? Because God is sustaining you. So who's more real? You or God? Who comes first? It's kind of obvious. God comes first. So if God comes first, then why aren't you more conscious of God than you are of yourself? Right? You don't, like when it's cold outside, when you step out, you become conscious that there's cold air that you're breathing. But are you alive? What is the basis of your existence? The air that you breathe, or the God that is sustaining you? Okay? He is. Like the Creator is more real than his creation. But we're not conscious of that. We affirm that yes, He's the creator of everything. But the wall is much more real to us than the one who created it. The one who's sustaining it. Right? So the realization of faith is really the point of existence. Right? وَهُوَ مَعَكُمْ أَيْنَمَا كُنْتُمْ. He is with you wherever you may be. What is the essence of religion? أَن تَعْبُدَ اللَّهَ كَأَنَّكَ تَرَاهُ. That you be in a state of submission, of devotion, of worship to Allah as though you behold Him. And that is the point of religion. Everything else is a facilitative means to this reality in this life. And that is the basis of absolute attainment in the next. And it's not an accident that the greatest reward in paradise is beholding Allah. Now, the generality of believers are granted that on occasion in paradise. And it's the greatest bliss. Even though in this life they did not have a heart beholding of Allah. So even that would make someone think that if that is the greatest reward eternally, what can one do in this life to attain that lastingly, eternally? And it's to be present with God in this life, with one's heart. And that is the point of life. Right? The point of life is presence with Allah. As the poet said, عَلَى نَفْسِهِ فَلْيَبْكِ مَنْ ضَاعَ عُمْرُهُ. Upon their own self, let cry one who squandered their life. وَلَيْسَ لَهُ مِنْهَا نَصِيبٌ وَلَا سَهْمٌ. And who does not have from that presence with Allah, no share nor part. Right? And this is the state of our beloved Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But we cannot even begin to imagine his state. But he said, لَسْتُ كَهَيْئَتِكُمْ. I'm not like you are. تَنَامُ عَيْنَايَ وَلَا يَنَامُ قَلْبِي. Though my eyes may sleep, my heart does not. Because he was conscious of Allah even in his sleep. Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. كان رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يذكر الله على كل أحيانه. The Messenger of Allah, said Sayyidah Aisha, radiallahu anha, would be conscious of Allah in all his states. And there's numerous texts of the Quran and Sunnah that affirm that. Allah commanded His Messenger, وَلَا تَكُمْ مِنَ الْغَافِلِينَ, be not of the heedless. And we know necessarily the Prophet obeyed the command of God. We'll be looking in the next two sessions, which are on the roots and principles of spirituality, on what the keys are of the realization of faith. That it comes from having a purpose. Right? What is your purpose in life? It is Allah. There's a path to consciousness of Allah, which is living guidance and acting upon it, which is embracing guidance and acting upon it. And the purpose of guidance is to be guided to Allah. That is the ultimate purpose of guidance. There's other relative purposes, to gain some reward, etc., but those are secondary. There's a method to it, which is that one is striving to nurture and increase one's faith by nurturing sincerity and excellence in all that one does. And the sign that is happening is that one's heart is changing. It is acquiring those qualities that Allah has told us are qualities pleasing to Him and qualities that facilitate presence with Allah, and that one's heart is ridding itself or is becoming rid of those qualities that distance from Allah and prevent from presence with Him. So that's what we're going to look at in the next lesson. And to reiterate the readings that we'd emphasize, but in lesson number 9, we're going to be looking at the realization of faith, which is the spiritual call of the Quran and the Sunnah. And then in lesson 10, we'll be looking at the key principles of Islamic spirituality, which we'll be looking at some of the principles of the science of spirituality mentioned by Imam Zarruq in his Qawaid, in his work on first principles. So that's what we wanted to touch about, some of the key principles of how we approach faith and how we support it and strive through that to nurture it. Any questions before we close?